What's the deal with the autism spectrum disorder diagnosis? Where did Asperger's go? Why is it everything lumped together under this one umbrella term? I'm Carrie Sousa Woodward. I'm a board-certified behavior analyst, and I've been working in the applied behavior analysis, or ABA, field with autistic kids and adults for over 20 years. There's a book called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, and essentially this is the textbook that provides all psychological diagnoses and then gives a characteristic breakdown for each of the diagnoses. This is like bipolar disorder to borderline personality disorder. All of the mental health issues, all of the psychological diagnoses live in this manual, including the autism diagnosis. And prior to 2013, we were operating on the DSM-4, which means it was the fourth edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And essentially, when they are going to be updating a version, there are many professionals who all sort of come together and have to decide and agree on how they're going to be rearranging the diagnoses within the context of this manual. So version 5 came out in 2013, and what it did was a hugely significant change to autism-like diagnoses. So prior to 2013, we had the autism diagnosis, but we also had an Asperger's syndrome diagnosis, we had Rett's syndrome diagnosis, we had something called pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified, or PDD-NOS, and then we also had something called the childhood disintegrative disorder. Now, when they looked at all of these different diagnoses, they specifically took autism, Asperger's, and PDD-NOS and decided that all three of these really had the same sort of character profile in terms of symptoms. It just varied in severity. Kids who were getting an autism spectrum disorder diagnosis tended to have more needs versus kids who were getting an Asperger's diagnosis or a PDD-NOS diagnosis. So because the symptoms were all the same, they decided that really they needed to be lumped together all under this umbrella term of autism spectrum disorder. Now, within this version 5 umbrella of autism spectrum disorder, they break it down in terms of different levels. So they have a level 1, level 2, and level 3. Level 3 is requiring significant or substantial support, and level 1 is just requiring support. They also now have this added piece of information on whether or not this person has language impairment or whether they have intellectual impairment. So when you get a diagnosis these days, you're going to get whether or not the person meets the criteria for autism spectrum disorder. Then they're going to see what level the person is and whether or not this diagnosis comes with language impairment or with or without intellectual impairment. And something that happened as a result of this change in the new DSM-5 was that people who would have previously been a part of Asperger's diagnosis group or the PDD-NOS diagnosis group sort of lost their identity. They got this new diagnosis. They all were characterized now as autism spectrum disorder. And I'm a behavior analyst. I'm not a diagnostician, so I don't run the ADOS, which is a diagnostic tool, and I don't provide diagnoses. But I have been in the field and working with children with autism, Asperger's, formerly Asperger's, PDD-NOS, for over 20 years. So I've had a lot of experience seeing how these look, how they feel, what types of needs are exhibited by people who would have had one of these previous classifications that now is lumped in as autism spectrum disorder. And I think that there were pros and there were cons to this move. One of the pros is that around this time, we were really starting to see a push in legislation to require insurance companies to cover applied behavior analysis, or ABA, for children with autism. Now, if you didn't have that autism label, you were left out of really getting this treatment that could be hugely beneficial to you. So in bringing everything under this umbrella of autism, we are now having kids who have a whole range of needs who would still meet the diagnostic criteria in order to be eligible to receive ABA services funded by their insurance provider. And behaviorally, as a clinician, the diagnosis really does nothing in informing us how we are going to help support this person. It may be just a piece of paper with words on it, and it doesn't tell us anything about the individual. So whether it was formerly Asperger's or now autism level 1 or autism level 3, we still are going to meet the individual, conduct our own behavioral assessments, and create a unique treatment plan that best supports the person in whatever needs that they have. And from a clinical perspective, in terms of treatment, designing a program for a level 3 support, I won't say it's easy, but it's a lot more straightforward than designing a treatment plan to support somebody with level 1 needs. When you have a level 3 individual, we are talking about an individual who requires significant support. This may mean that you're working on very early stage of language development. Maybe you're working on very early listener behavior skills, meaning following instructions, being able to make selections from the environment, being able to hear your name and attune to who's calling you. These are all very basic programming. And so a new behavior analyst who's just recently gotten their certification is going to be very well qualified to create a treatment plan to address level 3 needs. However, the level 1 needs are a lot more nuanced, and it really takes a very seasoned BCBA to create a treatment plan that is super comprehensive and that is insightful, that is taking the person into the treatment plan decisions and creating a treatment plan that the person feels very comfortable with and that addresses the very high level needs that they may have. So just from a clinical perspective, getting rid of the Asperger's diagnosis and lumping it in with autism doesn't really do anything in terms of how we would create treatment plans for each individual. However, there is one area where I feel like this combining all under the autism umbrella has done a huge disservice to the autism community. You have a group of autistic adults who most likely would have previously received an Asperger's diagnosis and are most likely now in autism level 1 support, who are vocal about autism acceptance, neurodiversity acceptance, that our society should be learning to adapt to include autistic people and become more inclusive and accepting of autistic people, which I don't disagree with. They feel as if the society really needs to treat autism the way that we were looking at physically handicapped individuals when the Americans with Disabilities Act passed, which is that all of the communities now needed to create adjustments and modifications to the physical environment to support people who had physical limitations or were in a wheelchair. And so you have this neurodiversity movement that's really saying, hey, we don't need to change who we are. We are amazing. We have all of these wonderful qualities and skills, and society should simply just adapt to us. And there are a lot of autistic adults who are very outspoken in terms of ABA treatment being abusive and not being the right type of treatment for kids with autism, because autism is something that's great and we shouldn't be trying to cure it or fix it. And I think if that works for each individual autistic person, fantastic. I understand where they're coming from, which is that they're trying to advocate for children whose parents are making decisions for them and don't really have a voice in deciding their treatment plan. So these autistic adults are saying, hey, parents, listen up. Stop doing all of this treatment for your kids. Your kids are just fine. And in fact, I have seen some comments and some videos and stuff online that really, this is the sentiment. Your kids are fine. Stop trying to fix them. Stop trying to cure them. Celebrate who they are. But what happens is that this is leaving out a huge chunk of autistic people that have needs that cannot be ignored, that make their life miserable, that make their family's life incredibly difficult. This is going to be a level 3 type of kid. And there is a movement that is starting that is trying to get a delineation in this autism diagnosis to say there is something called profound autism. And this is very different than somebody who is a level 1 support. These profoundly autistic people, I have worked with very many of them. They require so much help and support in order to lead their best life possible, that to simply say they're fine, they don't need to be fixed, they don't need to be cured, is really missing such a huge chunk of what's going to make their life meaningful. When you have people who are 14 years old and still wearing diapers because nobody was able to get them potty trained and able to use the toilet, their life is impacted, their family's life is impacted. When you have people who are in diapers and are pulling feces out of their diapers and smearing it all over the wall or eating it, these people's lives are profoundly impacted and they require help and support. When you have people who have never developed functional communication and the ability to communicate with their social environment, that's a disservice to them. Everybody deserves the opportunity to have a voice and have their voice heard. And I don't mean vocal language, meaning that they can speak with their voice. I'm talking about sign language or learning how to use an adaptive communication device like an iPad where they can actually communicate their wants and needs. It's not fair to these people to say they're fine and they don't deserve treatment because autistic people don't need to be changed. I'm not out here advocating that they need to be changed. I'm out here advocating that there is so much benefit that can be gained from people going through a traditional ABA program to give them skills that they would not have received without the program. Communication skills, the ability to learn in a classroom setting, the ability to go out in the community with their families and experience things that they would not have been able to experience because their behavior was impacting their ability to enjoy this. Go to the zoo, go to restaurants, go out in the community. I have met families whose lives have become prisons in their home because they cannot leave. They cannot get people into the house to help them because their child is so aggressive toward others, and they deserve to have a voice in the autism conversation. I saw something online recently, and he was a doctoral level BCBA who basically said, I am not an autism expert. I am an expert in applied behavior analysis. Essentially, his message was that the only people who have a relevancy in saying they're experts in autism are autistic people. And I don't disagree that autistic people are experts in their perspectives of their disorder. But I also think that there is room and space for a lot of different types of people who have different areas of expertise, all pertaining to autism spectrum disorder. So parents who have been raising children on the spectrum for 20 years are experts with their perspective on autism spectrum disorder. Professionals who have been treating people on the spectrum for over 20 years have a right to say that they have expertise in the area of autism spectrum disorder. People who are autistic have a right to say that they are experts in their perspective of autism. And I think everybody's voice needs to be a part of the conversation because there's not one voice that is more important or more correct or accurate than other voices. There is such a huge variety of individuals on the autism spectrum that there are going to be different solutions to problems for these types of people. There isn't this is the answer for all people with autism spectrum disorder. So I think that there was a lot of positive benefit to combining the PDD, NOS, Aspergers, and autism all under this autism spectrum disorder umbrella. I think that the thing that we need to work very hard to do now is to make sure that every different unique individual that lies somewhere on the spectrum has the supports necessary that they can live their best, most fulfilled life possible. And it's not the same answer for everybody. So when you meet somebody who has a different perspective than you about autism spectrum disorder, allow their voice to be part of the conversation. Understand that what may work for one unique individual may not work for another unique individual, and that's okay. It doesn't mean that one person is wrong and one person is right. It means that we can both be right for different people and different needs. I encourage everybody to have a voice and to be open to dialogue with other people who have differing opinions, and allow those opinions to help you inform your own opinion that should be evolving and changing and growing as we learn more information, read new research, meet new people, incorporate all of these different perspectives into how autistic people and children are going to be able to live their best, most fulfilled lives.